I'm Claire Whitman, 34 years old, and if you'd seen me walk into my father's birthday party that night wearing a navy suit, holding a leather folder, you might have thought I was just another guest. But I wasn't. I was the daughter no one invited, the one they left out of the speeches, the photos, the will. My father raised his glass in front of 100 people and said, "She's not my biological child," so I forgot to include her. I didn't speak. I just stepped forward and gave him a gift he'd never forget. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to find your own way when family left you behind. I grew up believing I was chosen. That's what my mom used to tell me. "You didn't grow in my belly, Claire, but you grew in my heart." I'd nod and smile proud of that secret special bond we had. My dad, Robert, was a quiet man, a banker who wore crisp white shirts and polished shoes, always home in time for dinner, but never one to say much. Still, I remember him clapping once when I came home with a math award, or the way he'd hand me the Sunday comics before pouring his coffee. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough. A 2-bedroom house with yellow shutters, cinnamon pancakes on weekends, and a front yard that bloomed with marigolds every spring. I had a pink bike with streamers, a bunk bed with glow-in-the-dark stars above it, and parents who tucked me in with bedtime stories. That version of my childhood felt solid. For a while. Everything changed the year I turned 8. My mom, Rachel, got pregnant. I remember waiting outside the maternity wing with a stuffed rabbit in my lap, clutching it, like it might keep me from drifting too far from the center. When my baby brother Noah was born, the gravity of our family shifted. I tried to understand it made sense for a newborn to need more, but as weeks turned to months, then years, it was clear something else had changed. At school pickup, I'd hold up my artwork, but Mom barely glanced before cooing at Noah's gurgles. At dinner, I spilled juice and heard my dad mutter, "This one's not even blood," while wiping the table a little too hard. He didn't know I heard. But I did. After that, the bedtime stories stopped. My drawings went into a kitchen drawer, while Noah's scribbles were pinned to the fridge. I started doing chores without being asked, watching him while they ran errands, smiling even when I felt invisible. I told myself it was just a phase, that it would pass, but by the time I turned 15, I knew better. Being adopted didn't make me special. It made me optional. I didn't yell or rebel. I studied. I saved. I sketched floor plans in the quiet hours of the night, my dream house, where I'd live one day far from this place. I told myself I'd build a life they couldn't ignore. The morning I turned 18, I packed 2 bags and left. No goodbye, no tears. Just a quiet breakfast, my dad rustling the newspaper, while my mom stood by the door and said, "Good luck out there." And as I stepped onto that Greyhound bus with a scholarship letter and $400 in my pocket, I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. The first night in San Diego was colder than I expected. I laid my thin mattress on the concrete floor of a garage apartment that smelled faintly of oil and damp wood. There was a crack in the window and I patched it with duct tape, but the wind still slipped through. I stacked textbooks along the base of the door to keep the chill out and curled up with my backpack as a pillow. I had $412 to my name and a scholarship to the state university, but no one waiting on the other side of that night. During the day, I went to class. At night, I worked the front desk at a 24-hour gym, wiping down machines between homework assignments. On weekends, I tutored high school students in math and physics. I ate instant noodles, coffee shop leftovers, whatever I could afford. Some mornings I'd walk to the bluff overlooking the bay and sit there sipping weak coffee from a paper cup, staring out at the water. It made things feel a little bigger than the 4 walls I was scraping by in. I kept my head down. I didn't party. I didn't call home. I didn't expect anything from anyone. I saved every spare dollar, logging every expense in a notebook I kept tucked under my mattress. The pages were worn, the corners frayed, but I filled it with numbers, sketches, building ideas, anything that reminded me I was working toward something more. Every time I thought about quitting, I'd hear my father's voice again. "This one's not even blood." That sentence became my fuel. I poured everything into my coursework, into learning structural systems and sustainable design. While other students dreamed of skyscrapers and glossy portfolios, I was designing floor plans that could withstand wind, water, and time. Homes that wouldn't break under pressure. Homes that didn't leave people behind. By my junior year, one of my professors took notice. He ran a small eco-design firm across town and offered me a paid internship. It wasn't much minimum wage and long hours, but it meant I could finally stop working nights. I said yes without hesitation. The office was modest, just a few desks and a shared coffee pot, but it felt like a place where ideas had room to grow. I still didn't hear from anyone back home. No texts, no missed calls, not even a birthday card. When graduation rolled around, I crossed the stage alone. I wore my cap, shook hands with the dean, and walked past the rows of clapping strangers. In the front row where my parents might have been there was only an empty seat. I didn't linger. I just walked out the doors and kept moving. After graduation, I stayed in San Diego. It was the first place that ever felt like mine. I found a small apartment above a bakery just far enough from campus that the streets were quiet at night. I joined a local construction firm focused on sustainable housing. My title was Junior Design Engineer, but I volunteered for everything: school repairs, public housing, retrofits, any project no one else wanted. I showed up early. I stayed late. I learned everything I could. A year in, I led my first project, a small solar-powered duplex out in Chula Vista. It wasn't flashy, but my name was on the permit. My fingerprints were on every beam and joint. I visited the site every day, making sure the framing held, the panels were mounted right, the windows sealed. That duplex was solid. It stood because I built it. Still, I kept dreaming bigger. At night, I'd sit at my kitchen table and sketch. Designs that filtered sunlight just right, roofs that collected rainwater. Living spaces that breathed with the seasons. I wanted to build homes that weren't just safe, they were healing. That's when I started Hollow and Hearth. Just me, a domain name, and a few saved dollars. I coded the website myself, sent proposals to anyone who would listen. Most didn't reply. Some said my firm was too small. A few told me I was ambitious for someone with no legacy. But one day, a woman named Trina Delgado called. She was a single mother with a teenage son. She'd inherited a small plot of land on the edge of town, rocky, overgrown, mostly forgotten. Every architect she met quoted her prices she couldn't afford. I offered her something different. A compact home built with reclaimed materials, passive cooling for the summers, solar panels for light and heat, a garden with native plants that wouldn't need constant watering. She said yes. We built her home in 6 months. It had sunlight in the right corners, a quiet porch for her morning coffee, and a door her son helped install himself. The local paper ran a story about it. A resilient home for a resilient family. That one article changed everything. The phone started ringing. Nonprofits, community groups, a few city officials. By the end of year 3, I had a small team. We worked out of a converted office near Balboa Park, 6 desks, 1 whiteboard, and a bulletin board where we pinned every thank you note we received. I kept one rule at the center of everything we did: never build for ego, always build for belonging. I thought I had closed the chapter on the past, but one afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from someone I hadn't spoken to since high school. It was short, just a link to a news segment. My father had announced his retirement. There'd be a party, they said, a celebration of his career. His 70th birthday rolled into one. I stared at the message for a long time, then I deleted it. But that night, while reviewing blueprints in my apartment, the silence in the room shifted. I kept thinking about that house, the one with the yellow shutters and daisy bushes, and the last time I saw it in the rearview mirror. I didn't miss the people, but I couldn't shake the thought of walking back in, not to be accepted, not to prove anything, just to leave something behind. And that's when I knew what I had to do. I remembered something my father once said to me years ago when I was 10. He was watering the lawn in his work slacks, sleeves rolled up, sweat darkening the back of his shirt. I had come home upset from school, sat down on the porch and muttered that I didn't need friends anyway. He looked over, barely pausing the hose, and said, "You know what matters, Claire, owning land. That's what makes people take you seriously." He probably never thought about that moment again. But I had. That memory came back late one night as I sat at my desk staring at site maps and elevation sketches the same way I had 100 nights before. Except this time I wasn't drawing for a client. I was thinking about him, about the party he would throw, the speeches, the catered food, the music under twinkling lights, and how I would arrive not to be seen but to leave something behind. I started looking at listings the next day, not just any piece of property, but one that felt grounded, permanent. I found a quiet parcel near Lake Tahoe, almost 6 acres with old redwoods and a view of the mountain ridgeline that turned gold at sunset. No buildings, no pavement, just space, untouched. The asking price was over $3 million. I didn't blink. I called my lawyer and transferred the deed into my father's name. Clean, no press, no signature required from him, just a gift. No fanfare, no explanation. And if he never understood the meaning behind it, that was fine. Maybe it wasn't for him anyway. The plan was simple. I'd deliver it on his birthday, along with everyone else's cards and toasts and bottles of wine. But this wouldn't go in a gift bag. I placed the deed in a smooth leather folder and had his name stamped on the front in gold letters, Robert Whitman. Of course I wasn't invited. I hadn't spoken to him or to my mother since I left for college. But word of the party made its way to me through an old neighbor. Retirement and 70th birthday rolled into one. Over 100 guests. Garden lights. String quartet. Someone mentioned a custom cake. The morning of the event, I ironed my navy suit, the same one I wore when our firm landed its first city contract. It wasn't flashy, but it felt like mine. I slid the folder into my bag, locked the apartment, and started the drive north. It was over 8 hours from San Diego to Sacramento. I didn't turn on music. I let the road pass under me in silence, thinking about what I'd say if anyone asked why I came. Maybe nothing. Maybe just hand it over and leave. I reached the house just as the sun began to dip behind the trees. The white picket fence was still there. The daisy bushes in the front yard had grown wild around the porch rails. The sound of conversation carried from the backyard. Soft laughter, the clink of glasses, the murmur of speeches in between songs. I stood at the gate for a moment, then walked through. No one noticed me at first. Everyone was dressed in light summer colors, holding drinks, laughing in clusters beneath the pergola. The tables were set with white linens and small floral arrangements. I scanned the crowd and saw him, my father, standing near the head table, holding a glass of red wine, smiling as he spoke into a microphone. My mother, Rachel, stood beside him in a soft green dress. Her hand rested lightly on his arm. Then someone turned and saw me. It was Noah. He was taller now, broader, wearing a gray blazer that probably cost more than my first apartment. He froze for half a second, then tilted his head smirking. "Well, well," he said loud enough for the nearest guest to hear. "Look who wandered in." A few people turned. One woman gave a polite smile and then looked away. "Let me guess," he added. "Came to cause a scene." I didn't answer. I just kept walking. At the head table, my father's voice carried across the lawn. "Before we wrap up tonight, I'd like to share one more thing," he said, lifting his glass slightly. "The details of my estate." The laughter and chatter paused. People leaned in. "To my son Noah," he continued, "I leave everything: the house, the accounts, the land." He looked straight at me. "As for Claire, she's not my biological child, so I forgot to put her in the will." For a moment, the backyard was silent. Then the laughter began again. Louder this time. Glasses clinked. Someone whistled. A few guests chuckled into their napkins, unsure whether it was a joke. I didn't speak. I didn't move. Rachel looked away. Her eyes flicked toward the musicians, then down at the tablecloth. I stepped forward, reached the head table, and placed the leather folder down. Noah raised an eyebrow. "You brought a gift," he said. "That's cute." I opened the folder, pulled out the single sheet of paper, and held it up. The gold-embossed title at the top read, "Grant of Property Transfer, Parcel LTA 54721, Lake Tahoe County." The laughter faded. "I bought this land," I said, voice steady. 6 acres, Lake Tahoe. Quiet, private, undeveloped. It was going to be yours." My father stared at the document. I could see it the moment he realized what it was. "But now," I said, "it isn't." Then I tore the paper in half. A soft gasp moved through the guests. I tore it again, then again, until the deed was in scraps across the table. Some of it fluttered into the frosting of the cake. Noah stopped smiling. Rachel's wineglass shook in her hand. My father didn't speak. He just stared at the torn pieces, hands still at his sides. His jaw clenched, once then again. I waited. Nothing. "I didn't come to argue," I said. "I came to show you what I built. Without you." Then I turned and walked back through the crowd. No applause. No one followed. I passed a woman who whispered to the person beside her. "Did she say Lake Tahoe?" Someone else murmured. 3 million. That can't be right." I stepped through the gate back onto the street and didn't look behind me. The music picked up again, but it didn't sound the same. It was slower now, uneven, like it had forgotten the tune. I drove straight through the night, pulled off the freeway just after 2 a.m., parked outside my apartment, and sat behind the wheel for a long time before going inside. The lights of San Diego were quiet that late, the streets empty, the air still. I walked up the stairs, unlocked the door, and didn't even take off my shoes. I just sat at my desk, folded my hands, and stared at the wall. I thought that was it. I thought the moment had passed, and the silence would return. 3 days later, my phone rang. The number wasn't saved. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes after that, a text came through. It read, "You don't know me. My name's Erica. I was at your father's party. I think you should hear what happened after you left." I sat with that message for a while, unsure if I wanted to open the door to any of it again, but I called. Erica introduced herself softly, said she worked at the bank, junior partner, newer to the team. She remembered meeting me once as a child, said I used to carry around a sketch pad even at family barbecues. Then she told me what happened after I walked out. She said the yard went quiet. No one spoke for a while. A few guests tried to act like nothing happened, but most of them just stood there waiting, watching. And then my father bent down. He didn't speak, didn't look at anyone. He just got on his knees in front of that long white table and started picking up the pieces of the torn deed, one by one. Erica paused like she wasn't sure if I was still listening. Then she said someone approached him, a man named Ken Clean, older board member, longtime friend of the family. He looked at my father and said, "You're a fool, Robert. That woman you humiliated built something you couldn't have even imagined." Erica said the tone of the evening shifted after that. Some guests left early. Others went to my mother, but she just kept saying the same thing over and over. "We didn't know. We didn't know." Noah tried to joke about it, called me dramatic, said I'd probably faked the whole thing, but no one laughed. Later that night, another message came in, this one from my Aunt Margaret. I hadn't heard from her in nearly 20 years. Her text said, "He's been in his study for hours. The deed is on his desk. He hasn't spoken to anyone." I didn't reply. But I didn't sleep much that night either. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering the way he looked at me when I tore the paper. Not angry, not smug, just still, like he didn't know what to do. A week passed, then 2, and then a letter arrived. Real envelope, handwritten, no return address on the front. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. It began, "Claire." I don't know how to begin this. I suppose that's fitting since I never really knew how to begin anything with you. I read the page once, then again. The words were plain, unpolished. He said he had failed me, failed to protect the bond we once had, failed to see what I was becoming, and in front of everyone, he had failed as a father. He ended with, "I picked up the pieces of what you gave me, not just the paper, the truth. I don't know how to make this right, but I'm sorry. Robert, not Dad, just Robert." I folded the letter carefully and set it down on my desk. I didn't cry. I didn't pick up a pen. Instead, I went to the closet, pulled out the old manila folder I used to keep my earliest sketches in, and slid the letter behind the floor plan I'd drawn when I was 14. It was the one I used to trace over again and again. A home on a hillside, a wide front porch, tall windows facing the lake. That's where the letter belonged, with the versions of me that used to wait for something more. The next morning, I opened my laptop and called my project manager. "I need a site plan," I told him. "For where I hesitated, then," said Lake Tahoe. He paused. "That's where the land was, right?" "No," I said. "That's where my land is now." The slope faced east, just above the tree line, with enough space for gardens, classrooms, and walking paths. When I stood there that spring morning with the wind moving through the pines, I could already picture it, the open walls, the long hallways with light pooling across the floor, the mural wall facing the mountains. This time I wasn't designing for a client. I wasn't drawing for contracts or awards. I was building something that would never need an apology, something I wished had existed for me. We called it the Haven. It would be a community center built for people like I once was, young adults who aged out of foster care, single mothers rebuilding their lives, girls trying to hold their place in a world that didn't always make room for them. Not a shelter, not a halfway point, a home base. The plans took 3 months. My team didn't question the location. When they asked what kind of structure I wanted, I said solar-powered, low-impact, built to last. We chose reclaimed wood for the frame and insulated glass for the exterior. We laid out workshop spaces, mentoring rooms, garden beds, a common kitchen. It had a warmth to it, even on paper. Construction began in late summer. I drove up every weekend to walk the site. I watched as concrete was poured, beams, lifted panels placed. Some days I helped unload supplies. Other times I just stood off to the side listening to the rhythm of hammers and saws echoing off the hills. No one asked about the history of the land. I didn't offer it. By spring, the Haven opened its doors. We started with 10 residents, 5 teens from the county system, 2 single mothers and their toddlers, and a young woman named Tara, who had been couch surfing for almost a year. The rooms filled quickly. Volunteers came from local schools, church groups, retired teachers. I showed up every Thursday.
sometimes to teach a design workshop.
Sometimes just to sweep the floors or eat lunch in the courtyard with whoever was around. The garden took a while to bloom, but when it did, it brought butterflies and hummingbirds. One afternoon, I watched a group of girls painting a mural along the back wall. Bright oranges and blues, tall trees, a rising sun. They worked quietly, focused the kind of still concentration I remembered from when I used to draw at my kitchen table long before anyone believed in me. Ela arrived 3 months after we opened. 16 eyes like stone arms crossed tight to her chest. Her caseworker said she hadn't spoken much since leaving her last placement. She didn't talk to me for the first few visits, just nodded when I passed her in the hallway. Then one afternoon, she stepped into the office where I was sorting through supply orders. She looked around, then asked, "You really built this?" I set the papers down. "Yeah," I said, "every part of it, even without a family," she asked. I nodded, especially without a family. She didn't say anything after that, just stood there for a minute, then walked forward and wrapped her arms around me. A quick hug, no words. But it held. That night, I sat out on the back steps while the solar lights clicked on one by one. The breeze carried the smell of lavender from the planter boxes. I closed my eyes and let it settle. I hadn't told Isla about my father, or the letter, or the party. None of them needed that story. But standing in the place where I had once tried to give everything away, I realized I had finally chosen to stay. It was early fall when I got the second letter. This one had a return address. It came tucked inside a manila envelope addressed in careful handwriting I hadn't seen since grade school. The name in the corner was my mother's Rachel Whitman. I stood in the office at the Haven holding it between my hands. I didn't open it right away. I slipped it into my drawer and finished my meetings, walked the garden paths, answered emails. But later that night, I unfolded it slowly, sitting on the edge of my bed with the window cracked open to let in the cool air. Her words were measured. No apologies, no excuses. Just a single-page letter about my father. She said he wasn't well. She didn't use the word cancer, but the description made it clear enough. A diagnosis that had come suddenly and worsened quickly. She said he had stepped away from the bank, that most days he stayed in his study, that he hadn't spoken to anyone outside the family since the night of the party. She said he kept the torn deed on his desk, still flattened, still taped together like he thought it could be fixed. She ended the letter with one request: "If you ever meant for him to see you, really see you, it's not too late." I folded the page and placed it beside the first letter he'd sent. Then I turned off the light and went to bed. 3 days later, my Aunt Margaret called. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant, like she wasn't sure I'd pick up. "I don't mean to interfere," she said, "but I think you should know. He's been asking about the project. He heard you built something up there. Asked if anyone could go see it. I didn't answer right away. Then she said, he hasn't left the house in weeks, but if you told him it was okay, he might." I spent the rest of that day on site at the Haven walking the perimeter, checking irrigation lines before the first frost. I watched a group of girls chalking outlines for a mural along the new shed wall. I stood near the solar panels as the sun shifted behind a cloud, casting soft shadows across the path. That evening, I called my project manager and asked if we could install a bench just off the edge of the garden, facing the lake. I didn't say who it was for. I never gave permission, but I didn't say no either. 2 weeks passed. Then one morning, just after sunrise, one of the maintenance workers told me a man had come by the gate. He didn't ask for anyone. Didn't speak much, just stood near the far edge of the property line looking out toward the trees. I asked what he looked like. The worker shrugged. Older guy, pale, gray coat, just stood there, quiet,
He didn't come inside, didn't knock, just stood there for maybe 10 minutes, then left. I walked out to the path later that afternoon, stood exactly where the bench had been placed, just in front of the eastern slope. The lake shimmered below, half hidden behind the tall pines. I sat there a long time. No one else came by that week. But 2 days later, another envelope arrived. This time, the handwriting was shaky. The ink smudged in places. The letter was short. Claire, I saw what you built. I don't know how to face it. I don't know how to say I'm proud when I didn't help you get there. But I need you to know I see it now. I see you.
Dad. That was the first time he signed it that way. I placed that letter with the others. I didn't write back. The next month, the Haven hosted its first full community dinner. We set up folding tables under the cedar trees, filled the kitchen with the smell of roasted squash, fresh bread and coffee cake from the bakery down the hill. Everyone came, volunteers, mentors, residents past and present. Isla brought her girlfriend. One of the toddlers fell asleep in a blanket beside the porch steps. I stood just inside the doorway and looked out across the tables, the lights strung overhead, the soft hum of conversation. It was the kind of evening I had once only drawn on paper. That night, I walked the path again. The bench was empty, but the wind moved through the trees with a kind of hush that felt full. The last envelope came in winter. No return address. Postmarked from Sacramento. The handwriting was uneven, more fragile than before, like each letter had taken effort to form. It arrived folded in thirds, sealed with plain tape. The paper inside was thin. I opened it slowly, standing in my kitchen with the kettle warming behind me. It read, Claire, I'm not writing to ask anything. I just want you to know that the land you gave what you built there, it's more than I ever deserved to see. But I saw it. And I see you now. I wish I had sooner. I don't know what kind of father I was. I only know what I lost. Thank you for letting me see it before the end. Dad. No requests, no explanations, just that. I set the letter down on the counter and stood there for a while listening to the quiet whistle of the kettle. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I folded the page and slid it into the manila folder with the others. The sketches from my teenage years were still in there, light pencil lines, notes in the margins, old floor plans. I tucked the letter between them. The next day I went to the Haven. Ela was painting again, this time on the east wall of the new classroom. She had outlined a sun rising behind the silhouette of a tall house windows, glowing the roof pitched high and wide. When she saw me, she gave a quick nod, but didn't stop painting. Inside, one of the volunteers handed me a stack of messages from the week calls from nonprofits, a local paper asking for a quote about our latest expansion. I flipped through them without much thought until I reached the last note. It was handwritten, addressed to Director Whitman from the county. The letter was short. Robert Whitman had passed. Quietly, no public service, no obituary. His estate had been settled. There were no additional requests, only a note stating that he had recently updated his records. The Lake Tahoe parcel, the one I had gifted, torn and reclaimed, was now officially listed in my name. I stared at the letter for a long time. I remembered the weight of that deed in my hand. The gold lettering. The way it had fluttered like dry leaves when I tore it down the middle. I remembered his face when he realized what it was, and the silence that followed. Now it was mine again. Official, final, no conditions, no signatures. That afternoon, I walked the property line. Snow had started to collect in soft patches along the edge of the trees. The bench by the eastern slope was dusted with frost. I sat there for a while, listening to the wind in the branches, the faint sounds of laughter drifting up from the garden below. I didn't feel triumphant.
I didn't feel grief, just quiet. Inside the hallway, lights had come on. Warm pools of gold stretched across the floors, catching flecks of color from the mural at the far end. The scent of roasted vegetables and bread filled the air from the shared kitchen. Someone was humming. I watched for a while longer, then stood and walked back down the path. The wind off the lake carried the faintest trace of wood smoke that afternoon. Somewhere nearby, someone had started a fire. I stood at the edge of the slope behind the Haven hands in my coat pockets, watching the late sun drift down past the trees. Below me, voices rose from the garden paths, kids laughing a few footsteps on gravel, the hum of something steady and alive. I could see one of the younger girls chalking shapes along the walkway, her sleeves pushed up, hair tied back in a loose knot. From this distance, it looked like freedom. The land was quiet, still mine, not by deed, not by inheritance, but by choice. I never responded to my father's last letter. I never visited the house again. Whatever he saw in those final weeks, whether it was regret recognition or something in between, I let it stay with him. That bench on the slope was the closest I ever came to letting him back in, and maybe in his own way he understood that. Inside the Haven, the lights had begun to come on one room at a time, like lanterns on a hillside. The hallway glowed soft and golden. The smell of lentils and warm bread drifted from the kitchen. Isla stood by the front windows helping one of the younger girls line up art supplies. I watched as they laughed over something, their shadows stretching out behind them in the warm light. A few years earlier, I would have done anything to hear my father say he was proud of me. I waited a long time for that, held on to it like a thread I thought might one day pull me home. But in the end, I realized I didn't need him to say it. Not because I stopped caring, but because I had become someone who didn't need permission to exist. I built something solid, something that outlived apology. I walked the path down from the bench past the rows of new trees we'd planted, back toward the porch, where a group of volunteers were wrapping up for the day. Someone handed me a clipboard. Someone else asked about snow tires for the van. It was just another Tuesday. But it was everything. That night I sat at my desk and opened the folder with the letters. I didn't reread them. I didn't shred them either. I simply closed the folder and placed it in a box on the shelf beside my oldest floor plans, the ones with uneven lines and erased corners. They didn't belong on display. But they didn't need to be buried either. If you'd told me years ago that I'd find peace not through reconciliation, but through creation, I don't know if I would have believed you. But sometimes, justice isn't about what we get back. It's about what we build in spite of what we never received. We don't always get the apology. We don't always get the seat at the table. But we can build our own table, one that welcomes others who've been left standing. Thank you for listening. If this story meant something to you, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their worth was never up for a vote. And if you're still building, I hope you know, you're not alone.